Division of fractions. How to divide a fraction by a whole number. To divide a fraction by a whole number, simply multiply it by the reciprocal of the number. What does this mean? It means the 3 must be inverted, which means 3 over 1 then becomes 1 over 3. So a third is the reciprocal of 3. And then we just multiply normally. We can multiply the numerators and the denominators. Let's use a visual explanation to show this. So we want a third, but we want 5/8 of a third. So we're taking a third of 5/8 by dividing it by 3. And there we go. Our answer is 5/24. So do you see, to divide by 3 is the same as to multiply by a third. We say a third is the reciprocal of 3. Let's try another one. So we want to know how many 2/3 are there in 4 whole ones. So to divide a whole number by a fraction, simply multiply it by the reciprocal of that fraction. So what we do is we will say 4 means 4 over 1. Then we'll multiply it by 3/2 instead of 2/3. And then we'll multiply normally. 12 divided by 2 or 12/2, and that is 6. You can also simplify earlier by dividing the 2 into the 4. And then it's super easy. Let's use a visual explanation. So the question is, how many 2/3 are there in 4? So there's 2/3. There's another 2/3. In total, we see that there are 6 2/3. So what will we do in the next questions? We will say 3 multiplied by 4 over 3. And 5 multiplied by 3 over 2. And 2 multiplied by 3. 7 multiply that by 5. Wow, this means you can divide fractions. So to divide any fraction by another, simply multiply by the reciprocal of that fraction. Let's see. If we've got 3/4 divided by 2/3, that's the same as 3/4 multiplied by 3/2. And that is the same as 9/8, which is 1 and 1/8. Let's look at example 2. 11/12 divided by 2/9 is the same as 11/12 multiplied by 9/2. And that is the same as 99/24, which is 4 and 1/8. Let's try to explain it in a different way. So why is 3/4 divided by 2/3 the same as 3/4 multiplied by 3/2? The question is, how many 1/3 are there in a whole? Yes, there are 3. So 3 is the reciprocal of 1/3, because 3 times a third is 1. Now we can ask, how many 2/3 are there in the whole? So if there are 3 1/3, it means there must be 3 divided by 2 2/3 in a whole. So the reciprocal for 3/2 will be 2/3. Now we can ask, how many 2/3 are there in 3/4? It must be that 3/4 of the number that are in the whole. So therefore, 3/4 times 3/2. Let's look at another example. So why are 3/8 divided by 4/5 the same as 3/8 multiplied by 5/4? So the question is, how many 1/5 in a whole? Yes, 5. So 5 is the reciprocal of 1/5. So now we can ask, how many 4/5 in a whole? So now we have to divide that 5 by 4. So 5/4 is the reciprocal of 4/5. Now that we know that, we can ask ourselves, how many 4/5 in 3/8? In other words, it must be 3/8 of the number that are in the whole. So 3/8 times 5/4. So here is a general rule. If we've got A divided by B, or A over B as a fraction, divided by C over D, then that is the same as A over B multiplied by the reciprocal, in other words, D over C. And the question is, how many 1Ds in a whole? So D is the reciprocal of 1 over D. So how many CDs in a whole? That means it must be D divided by C. So D divided by C is the reciprocal of C over D. So then how many CDs and ABs? Obviously it will be AB times DC. Even if you don't understand this, just remember if you divide a fraction by a fraction, you keep this first fraction as it is, but then you multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Let's apply this again. So 3/4 divided by 3 is the same as 3/4 multiplied by a third. And that is 3/12, and that's a quarter. Look on the right side. Instead of multiplying the numerators and denominators, why don't we just cancel the 3's? We skip a step, 1/4. What about this one? 2/3 divided by 5 is the same as 2/3 multiplied by a fifth. Now we cannot cancel anything, so we multiply the numerators and the denominators. 5/6 divided by 2 is the same as 5/6 multiplied by a half. We multiply the numerators and the denominators. But look at this one, we can do it shorter. We can say 3/4 times a third, and instead of denominators, we can just cancel the 3's to get a quarter. What about this one? We multiply by 2/1. But in the second example, we cancel the 2, the factor of 2. So we divide 2 by itself and 6 by 2. And that gives us 5/3. So we skip one step. Pause the video and see if you can do the following. Remember, you keep the first fraction 3/4, but you multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. And then try to simplify before you multiply. Pause the video and see if you get them right. Excellent.